And so we have to paint that picture for them that there's hope for a better life, that you deserve better than sleeping in dirt and having bugs crawling all over you. You deserve better than going to the bathroom underneath a bush. You deserve better than having everybody, snicker at you. And so we build that hope, in a better tomorrow. And then finally they start to believe it.
Hey, baby, it's time for the NIKKI ALPERT Podcast. Come on, pull up a chair. We gonna have some fun.
Ken Kraft, welcome to my virtual chair.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Such a pleasure. I reached out to you on a DM and you got right back to me, and the kindness and the generosity that you spend all day long doing was very well received by me. Can you tell our viewers what you do, who you are, and what you do?
Sure. My name is Ken Kraft. I am the founder and CEO at Hope of the Valley Rescue Mission. We are a health and human service provider and housing in the San Fernando Valley, but we continue to grow and to expand. We started very humbly. I mean, we started 11 years ago just serving hot meals out of this little church that let us use their facility. It's the only thing I could find. And we continue to grow. Now we do about 1,500 meals per day. We have 9 shelters. We have 3 of those are family shelters. We have a youth shelter for those who've timed out of foster care. We have multiple adult shelters, and we have 2 access centers that are gateways where anybody who's experiencing homelessness can come and we can help guide them. We can give them a hot meal, hot shower, clean clothes, case management, housing navigation, mental health services, substance abuse counseling. And so we're an agency that is highly committed to addressing poverty, hunger, and homelessness. I mean, our mission is to prevent, reduce, and eliminate poverty, hunger, and homelessness here in Los Angeles. And so that's what I've been working on the last 11 years. And it's been a pretty good run.
It's been a really good run because I've been looking at everything you've done, where it started and where it is. What is, do you have a statistic for the impact Hope of the Valley has actually made in the area that you are running?
Sometimes getting statistics is hard once people leave us.
Right.
It's hard to know, I know that on an average basis, we'll place 150 to 170 people into permanent housing each year. And so that continues to grow. Every day we have 507 beds between our 9 shelters. And that's up until this year. This year alone, we are going to be adding 6 new shelters, and our bed count will go from 507 to over 1,100 beds. And the reason why that's so important is because historically, there's no beds. There's no place for anyone to go. And so we have outreach teams. We're talking to the homeless and we're trying to encourage them and give them hope. And they go, great, can you get me in anywhere? No, there's no beds. And so now with this increase and the opening of these new facilities, and when it comes to homelessness, I think of it in 3 phases. There's emergency shelter, right. Then there's interim housing, and then there's permanent housing. And so many people, when they think of housing for the homeless or shelters, their idea is emergency shelter, basically where people show up at 4:00 in the evening, they fight to get a bed, they got it, they spend the night, they got to get up in the morning, and they're back out on the streets.
Get out, yeah.
And so we don't do that. We don't have any of those. Instead, we have really focused on interim housing. And that is once people come to us, they stay with us. They stay with us until such time as we can move them into permanent housing. In a perfect world, I would move everybody straight into permanent housing.
Right.
But the problem is there's no permanent housing.
It's too expensive, especially here, right?
the cost of an average one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles is $2,200. So if you take the average minimum wage and you extract that out, it's nearly impossible for someone to live here on a minimum wage, in making minimum wage.
Yeah.
And so what we do, we bring them in, and then our case managers work with them and help them get housing ready. Do you have your birth certificate? Do you have your state ID? Do you have, their basic documents? And then do you have, maybe there's criminal infractions that may be minor ones that we can help with. And then if they're able to work, then we also have a job center. Let's get them connected to employment. And if they cannot work, then we want to link them to public benefit so that they would qualify for SSI or SSDI. And so to me, the real heroes of our organization are our case managers and our housing navigators who work with our clients every day and to help them overcome every obstacle and barrier that's preventing them from being housed. And not a week goes by that we don't have multiple people being housed. And to me, that's our touchdown. That's our home run. That's our win. Every time we're able to take someone from the streets, then we stabilize them, and then we're able to get them into permanent housing.
So you make it sound so easy. And I know that it's not, because you and I have spoken a few times before today. And also I know that it's not because I've lived here all my life and I've seen it get worse every single year. So what's the difference between what people tried to do for years that wasn't working and what Hope of the Valley is doing that is working?
Well, when I first started doing homeless services, it was very difficult to open up facilities. You were only allowed to open a shelter with 30 beds or less in a C2 or CM zone.
I don't know what C2 or CM means.
Commercial.
Okay.
In a commercial zone, which is the most expensive zoning.
Right.
Okay. And you could only have 30 beds or less unless you had a conditional use permit. In order to get a conditional use permit, you would have to have public hearings.
And are these permits the same for every kind of company there is? Like they didn't have a different kind of permits or rules for homelessness, for homeless
different.
Housing?
Yes, it's its own category.
It is,
It was its own category.
Okay.
And it was very difficult. And so that's why, you had some that were grandfathered in, like downtown, like the Union Rescue Mission, LA Mission. Okay, but it was very difficult to open something. And then when you'd have these public hearings to get a conditional use permit, everybody would come out against you and say, I don't want that here, not here. And the politicians would look at where the vote's coming from.
That's right, the people who didn't want it there, right.
That's right. So that it was very difficult. But then recently, and I have to give praise to Mayor Eric Garcetti, because he saw this is a major problem. We have an epidemic going on of homelessness. Yeah. And so he declared a state of emergency. Okay, it's a technical term. And once he declared a state of emergency, because of the number of homeless individuals in our city, then the doors were open.
Of course they did, sure.
And we were able to then have shelters in other zoning, in M1 manufacturing, M2 manufacturing. And all of a sudden the limits were lifted. It wasn't 30 beds or less, and you didn't have to get a conditional use permit. So the last 3-4 years, we've been able to basically put the pedal to the metal and say, you know what, the political winds are now at our back. Let's put up our sails. Let's go for it because it might change in the future. Here's our opportunity, our window of opportunity to create sustainable programs and systems that are reproducible. And so I feel like, a lot of it is political and it's timing, and it's us having grown enough in our first 7 years so that when the opportunity presented itself,
you were ready.
We were able to respond. And so is our staff tired? Yes. I mean, you can't open 6 new shelters in a year without there being, a toll on staff. But I've reminded them, listen, now's our time. Now is our season. Let's do this.
Now's the time to put in the work.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this. I'm a woman who I see the same homeless people in my neighborhood, not right here, but in the very close, see the same guys, hand them some money, drop off, go through McDonald's and get them something to eat, donate blankets to people. And I feel pretty good about that. But what's the difference between like what makes someone like you dedicate your whole life to this? Besides the fact that you're a better person than I am.
You know, I I tell people I got into this by coming in the back door. Okay. Oftentimes, people might really have philanthropic hearts and they go to school, they go to university, they get their master's in social work, and that's what they intend to do.
Right.
I didn't come into it that way. Okay. Honestly, I say the back door because I had no intentions of doing this. It was only through my own broken world experience that my eyes were opened and I began to see humanity in a different light. And I realized that everybody is important, they're valued, they are precious, and many of us, we fall on hard times. And when we fall on hard times, we don't need judgment, we need love.
Yeah.
We need empowerment. We need people that will help pick us up and brush the dirt off us and get us back into the race. And so because I've experienced that myself, I find myself now drawn towards other people that have walked that same path. And it's a challenge because oftentimes when people who've become homeless, especially if there's mental illness, that
Right.
really complicates matters.
Yeah.
Substance abuse, that really complicates matters. But we work with each person individually. I was at one of our brand new shelters. We just opened up one Monday, the very first tiny home community.
Beautiful
And
too.
it really is.
Yeah.
And so I had a couple of meetings that I had to meet folks there today, but every spare moment I had, I walked around and found clients. And I love talking to them. And I asked everybody, I introduced myself and who I am. And I said, if you don't mind me asking, what's your first impressions? What do you think? And I mean, people were blown away. I asked one guy, I said, so where were you last night and before you came here? He says, I've lived the last 6 years across the street in a tent in the park. And I said, really? I said, why didn't you access any other facilities? He says, honestly, being in a congregant setting was too scary for me. I couldn't do it. But now that I can have my place and I can start to rebuild my life, I figured it's time to give it a chance. And which reminds me another lesson, and that is you never give up on people. Okay, just because they said no 6 years ago. Imagine the people that first started working with him 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago. Well, it wasn't until this week that he said yes.
Yeah. If they're not ready,
inside.
it's not going to work.
Yep. And now he was thrilled. And so, we have to constantly reevaluate and assess, is what we're doing working? Right. And because sometimes, if we just keep doing the same thing and getting the same results, that's nothing but frustration.
And you can see in Los Angeles that people were doing the same thing for so long and it hasn't been working. So clearly doing something different is the only way.
Yes. And I feel like we are, as a whole, the continuum of care, throughout Los Angeles, that the government is now working with us instead of working against us. And that the community is also fed up. And that's a good thing because they're saying, this is not okay. It is not okay for our, Angelinos, who may not be as fortunate to be sleeping on the streets. And so, I think it's the perfect storm right now where everything has come together and converged at this moment. And I find myself saying like, well, I guess we're in a good place. Is the right time, right place, right people? Let's do it. Let's make this happen.
So I love that. And I love that you refer to them as clients and not always the homeless, because it's not like they're just one group of everything that's the same. They're people who are your clients. You're there to serve them. And I think a lot of people don't look at people who've lost their homes that way. And you talked about having gone through a tough time and people helped, and that's why you got through it. Every interview I've watched in these last 2 weeks, every conversation I've ever had with a homeless person, I hate to say this, but I think they're kinder than your typical person who has enough money to pay their rent and pay their health insurance and feed their children. Like they're the least selfish. One guy walks around asking for 3 wishes, and almost all of the people who are without a home, you know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Almost all of them, that's so hard. I don't really spend time wishing for things. But one wish was for everybody else. And another wish, often they wanted to give it to other people.
Yeah. And I think a lot of folks, unless you've really experienced pain, it's difficult to have empathy.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I did early on is I knew I needed support from people that could help move the needle. Okay. So it takes money to make this work. And so I did a challenge, and I challenged senior executives, business owners, and I called it the empathy encounter. I challenged them to come spend one night in the cold weather shelter, which is our most raw. Okay, it'll impact you. It'll take your breath away, because our cold weather shelter, there's no cubicles, there's no private dwelling. It is 150 people all in one big room, sleeping on cots 2 feet away.
Cot to cot to cot, yeah.
Cot to cot to cot, okay? And so, yeah, I think of this one gentleman in particular. He owned a very large company, and he recently sold it for almost $1 billion. But I challenged him. I said, because he was a supporter, but I said, I want you to come, I want you to experience it. And he goes, I'll do it. And he'd done everything else in life. I mean, the only thing that money can't buy you sometimes is an experience.
And not on the streets either.
Yeah. And so I challenged him, and he had to stand in line. He had to ride in a van to come to the shelter.
I was going to say, he didn't get to drive or have his limo driver or his fancy car there.
No.
You made him wait in line to get on the bus.
Yes.
All the other homeless people and sit on the bus. So
So he came he met me in my office. I drove him to the pickup point. He had to stand in line with everybody else. He had to get into a 15-passenger van crammed with everybody else. He said, Ken, they were all hacking and coughing the whole time. I know I was going to get sick.
This was pre-COVID too.
This is pre-COVID,
yes.
Yeah. And they drove him to the shelter. He had to get out and stand in another line. And then the security guards had to pat him down and make sure he didn't have any drugs. This guy's a billionaire, okay? And I told him to try to dress down, but he didn't. He was still wearing like expensive clothing. And he got assigned a cot. And then he was sitting and having dinner, and some kid from a civic group came and served him his meal, and he's like feeling humiliated or just humbled.
Yeah.
And then he starts talking to the people around him and hearing their stories. One was a woman that had lived behind a dumpster at a Vaughn shopping center because her husband had recently passed away and they had no provisions, and she got evicted. She was terrified, didn't know what to do until she came to us. And he says, Ken, I listened to every one of these stories. He says, and my eyes were open. He says, I couldn't sleep that night. He says, I couldn't shut my mind off. He goes, not to mention there's every god-awful sound going on inside a room with 150 people. Men
burping, farting, everything, snoring.
You name it. And then he says he had to get up in the morning, and he had to wait in line to go to the bathroom. And he's like, this is ridiculous, because he lives in a house in Encino, okay, that has 10 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms.
Right.
He has an 8-car garage, temperature controlled 74 degrees. His second house is next to Pat Riley, that kind of thing, right? And so he left there. And when I finally picked him up, I said to him, so what'd you think? And he said, Ken, it was probably the most powerful thing I've ever done in my life. And he said this, I'll never forget. He says, when is enough enough? He says, I have so much, and I didn't even know these people existed. And so it changed. And he's a major donor, major supporter. He believes in the work that we're doing. And so I think sometimes, it's easy for us to get inoculated. It's easy for us to be desensitized to the true suffering around us. Mm-hmm. And, or we look at him and it's easy to judge him. Oh, just get a job. You're lazy. What's wrong with you? You're a drunk. One of the gals who just came into the new shelter, I was talking to her the other night, and I asked her, I said, so what does this mean to you? And she was telling me, and she says, Ken, people don't even look at you when you're on the streets. It's as if you're invisible. And she says, here, you guys talk to me and make me feel human again.
Yeah.
And I thought, man.
And that's all it takes.
Yeah. It's the little things. And so
Yeah.
I oftentimes people say to me, well, what can I do to help? And of course we need resources, but the other thing is just come be a friend.
Yeah.
Start talking to someone, because many of them just, they don't have anybody. Their family situation had fragmented. They have nowhere to turn. They feel lonely and isolated. And, we need to not judge because and I'll tell you, and I got to catch myself. And if I find myself catching myself judging people, I can only imagine what others do, because I live this every day. So this particular gal I was talking to, and I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but I'm thinking to myself, well, we didn't get you a job, and why are you, and I started making some mental judgments. I started talking to her. She says, what happened is, Ken, I had to flee a domestic violence situation. When I fled, I got actually hit by an 18-wheeler. She pulled up her pant leg and she showed me the most mangled leg I've seen. She says, I had to have 11 surgeries. And she said, I had nowhere to go and I became homeless. And it's one of those things that just slapped me again, because it is so easy to judge
when you
don't know the story.
Yeah.
And so
absolutely.
Getting to know people on a human level, it breeds compassion and empathy. And that's what we need. We need to love our brothers and sisters and help them, not judge them.
And it seems to me that the homeless and the people who suffer the most in this world are the least judgmental, and they make it a daily practice to do for others. And I think they're happier than most people who have loads of money and loads of choices and loads of freedom.
Yeah, and loads of stress.
Yeah, that too. It's so true. One day I was waiting for my car where I work, and as I was sitting there, I was waiting for the valet, and it's between two restaurants, and this homeless guy came around. And he started asking people for money, but he was being lovely. He wasn't just like asking for money. Hey, how are you? Having a nice night? Oh, don't you look? Oh, you look handsome. Oh, hey, being Philly, and they wouldn't even look at him. And he sort of walked up to me and he leaned against I was sitting on the wall, and he sort of leaned up against it, and I said, hey, and he said, are you talking to me? And I said, yeah. And he said, to me? I said, yeah. And he's like, hey. I said, what's your name? He said, Eddie. I said, hey, Eddie, I'm Nikki. We started to talk. And he's like, nobody talks to me, Nikki. And the guy who walks around Beverly Hills selling flowers came by, and he stopped him. Eddie bought me a rose. And we sat there and talked. And the gentleman who were getting my cars, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm totally fine. Yeah. So by the time my car came, Eddie was like, can I carry your stuff to the car? I promise I won't steal it. Oh. And I was like, of course you can. He's like, I just like to be nice because you were being so nice. He said, I'm not going to steal it. I said, Eddie, I'm not afraid of you. So he walked me to the car, and then he opened my door for me, and I went to hand him $5, and he said, I don't want your money. He said, what you did for me made me feel like a person. You talked to me. Yeah.
I mean, because think about this for a moment. Go back to elementary school. We're going to ask everybody here today, what would you like to be when you grow up? How many of you would like to be a fireman? Raise your hand. How many would like to be a doctor, professional sports player? How many of you would like to be homeless and live on the streets when you?
Nobody.
No. And so what happens is life happens. Okay. Nobody wants to or says, that's my goal in life. Right. Usually people just get torn up, whether it be relationally or financially, or they have huge losses. Physical disabilities, a mental disability sets in. And now you find individuals that when they live on the streets, many of them, the reason why they live in encampments, because they're terrified to live on their own. It's a safety mechanism. Yeah. Imagine you're, 50
safety in numbers.
In numbers, yeah. And imagine, but unfortunately also sometimes women go through tremendous abuse and sexual abuse because in order to stay safe, they have to do things that are unthinkable and unimaginable. That's one of the reasons why this new shelter means so much, because they can be in their own place, lock their door, there's 24-hour surveillance, they can sleep at night. Yeah. And, so I think, developing this compassion is huge. And then just basic life services. It's like this gal I was telling you about with the mangled leg. I came back later that afternoon, and she had had a shower. She was all cleaned up. She put on the best clothes that she had. I said, how you doing? She goes, oh my gosh, I feel so good. I had a shower. I actually laid down. I took a nap. I feel amazing. And then I'm talking to her because I recently had a conversation with the regional manager of Starbucks who said, Ken, let me help bring employment, to your clients. If they qualify and they're able, then we'll hire them. And so, giving people that hand up, not a hand up,
Right. Yeah.
empowering them, not enabling them.
Right.
And when we do that, we see, I get to see the best of humanity, because I see people who genuinely, they are humble, they've been broken and they're trying to rebuild. But I also see so many good people that do have resources that say, I want to make a difference in life. And so I get to be this bridge, between people that have and want to, and between those that don't have and want to get back into life. And so I feel like I live a charmed life. Is it always easy? No. Is there frustrations and setbacks? Yes. Is there disappointments? Of course. But to be able to do what I do on a daily basis and to, continue to create these systems and facilities and opportunities for people to start over again, to me, it's the greatest thing in the world.
I love that. Okay, so your company is called Hope of the Valley, and hope is your focus, not a handout, a hand up, and you rebuilding their faith in humanity and in themselves when you offer them, to clean up and look the part and then get the job. But I think a lot of these people are so broken and they've lost faith and hope. So what do your service providers, your social workers, how do they restore their faith in the people who come to help them when they've been let down by so many, and B, well, just the trust and the hope? How do you get them to trust you, to come to you?
It takes time. Somebody once said, truth plus time equals trust. Truth plus time equals trust. And oftentimes we don't, and you can't rush that equation. Okay, if there's no truth, how do you know something's true? Okay, you have to prove that, and then you have to give it time, and then trust is built. And we are committed to treating everybody with dignity, respect, that we listen to what they have to say, that if they have a grievance, we take it seriously, and whatever we could do to help them. And so I think that's just common courtesy and loving people where they're at, and being very sensitive. We also realize people are in progress, and the people who they are today is probably not who they're going to be tomorrow.
None of us.
And so exactly, we are in process. And so we accept people where they're at. But we love them too much to leave them where they're at. And so, you know what, there's a better tomorrow. And so we have to constantly paint a picture, because some of them they can't visualize a better life. And so we have to paint that picture for them, that there's hope for a better life, that you deserve better than sleeping in dirt and having bugs crawling all over you. You deserve better than going to the bathroom underneath a bush. You deserve better than having everybody, snicker at you and even abuse you and the way they treat them. And so we build that hope, in a better tomorrow. And then finally they start to believe it. They start to see themselves differently. And then we celebrate victories too. Okay, somebody gets a job, yay, they got a job. Somebody moves out, yay, we celebrate that. And all of a sudden people realize, that's what I want. That's right. What I can do. But, people have been destroyed on the inside. And so that's why, we're called Hope of the Valley. You must have hope to cope. Without hope, people don't live. And, I remember one of our moms in one of our family shelters. She had she had 3 kids, and she was a single mom. She felt overwhelmed. And one day, it's a sad story. Spoiler alert. And she had gone to do laundry for the girls, the kids, while they had gone to school. And she stood at the railroad tracks, and she said, I can't do it. And when the train came, she stepped right in front of the train. and it killed her, of course. And so she didn't show up that night. Her kids walked back from school and they're at the shelter, and where's mom? Mom's always here. The next day she didn't show up, and I'm getting really nervous. And I actually heard on KNX radio that a woman had been hit on the railroad tracks in North Hollywood. And
close to your shelter, obviously.
Yeah, just half a mile, not even a quarter mile.
Yeah.
And so I called the coroner's office. I positively identified her.
You did?
And, yeah, I had to identify her, and I had to tell her kids. Oh. These kids who've been through hell. Nobody knows what these kids go through. They go to school and they're too embarrassed to tell anybody that they're homeless, and they won't tell anyone. And now all of a sudden, their world just got turned upside down because mom couldn't handle it. It was just too much. And so that's why we need to be kind with our words. We don't know what that person's gone through. And it's the power of love and of compassion and generosity. It'll change someone's life,
They always say that, the girl who you call the whore might have been raped when she was a kid. The girl who all those things where you just don't know. And the bullying and the judging but people are so thick-skulled that for some reason it seems that people who have more feel better if they make other people feel like less.
Yeah. Life and death are in the power of the tongue.
Right.
And so we must control it. Because, and it's very easy to judge people that are homeless, and we stereotype them, but another example, there was a mom, and she had 2 teenage daughters. They lived in a house in Sylmar. The mom did home daycare, had a good business, but there was a house down the street that was bigger that she could lease. So she gave her notice at this house, moved to this house. It was bigger, and she took on more kids, and she was doing well. She's making her payment every month. Okay, so she was feeling good. Her girls were in school. Her girls were playing softball. Life was good for a single mom. And then all of a sudden, this is a few years ago, then the sheriff showed up and handed her an eviction notice. And she said, I don't get it. I make my payments every month. And they said, this is coming from the courts. And well, what happened is she was making her payments to the owner of the property. The owner of the property was not making their payment to the mortgage company.
So they took the house back.
They're foreclosing. And this mom had no cash reserves, nothing at all. Okay, she was just trying to rebuild her business. So they ended up living in their van for 6 months. And she says, people would bang on my window and say, get out of our neighborhood. What are you doing? And then the girls would have to go to McDonald's and use the sinks to wash their faces. And on the weekend, she had one friend that would let them come and take showers because of homeowners association. They couldn't live there. And she did this for 6 months. The girls actually played their entire softball season while being homeless. Nobody knew. And then oftentimes I talked to them afterwards, and they'd say, other kids would say, hey, can we come over to your house? And they're like, no, and had to make excuses because they didn't have a house. Well, eventually somebody told them about Hope of the Valley. They came, and I'll never forget the first night the mom spent the night, and she said afterwards, I said, how are you? And she said, for the first night in 6 months, I slept. She goes, this is a lifeline for us. In a matter of months, she got a job. She ended up moving out, and she's doing very well now.
Just needed a break.
We needed a break. And that's why, organizations like Hope of the Valley, that's what we do. We throw a lifeline to people that are struggling, and we help them get back, back into the game of life, and help them not to be overwhelmed. And it's amazing the things.
Obviously it doesn't work for everybody. We know that. But let me ask you this. There are so many homeless people already. And I think they extended the eviction thing for the COVID, right? It was supposed to be in March, but now it's going to be, am I right, June 30th?
June, yeah. Yes.
What kind of overwhelming stuff is going to happen to the system with that? Are you terrified?
I am. The last homeless count was about 70,000, and that's pre-COVID. It's yeah. I can't even really go there
Yeah,
mentally because I'm still just trying to deal with the current crisis.
right.
But we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think we need to all be prepared for some very challenging and difficult times uh, once the that moratorium is lifted.
So now that the government has your back, if you will, or has their back, I guess is a better way to say that. Um, and you were talking about one of the judges that is in the news lately doing all this, and you said the loveliest thing. You said, I think you said it. I don't know whether you said he said it or you said it, just about how Los Angeles is one of the richest cities in the country, and the Angelinos are tripping over the poor,
Mhm.
and that it's just absurd.
Yeah. So what happened is, and yeah, and that was, yeah, I shared that with you. That was
Yeah.
because I see that every day. But what happened is there was a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles from this nonprofit that basically says, Los Angeles, you know what, it is not fair and right for you to constantly be moving people and tearing down encampments when you have no other provisions for them. You're telling people you can't be here, but you have no other options. And so they filed a lawsuit against Los Angeles. And this judge, Judge Carter, David Carter, um, got involved. And he's the judge presiding over this lawsuit. And he began to do some examination. And he went to Skid Row, went to the West Side, came to the San Fernando Valley. And he said, look, Los Angeles, where's your beds? Other major cities have at least beds for 50, 60% of the people that are homeless in their cities. You have nothing. And he said, so here's what's going to happen. You can no longer enforce your anti camping laws until such time as you have beds. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you how many beds you need. You need every council district must come up with beds for 60% of the previous year's homeless count.
Wow.
He goes, once you do that, then you can enact your no camping laws. But until such time, you better get busy. So that's why Judge Carter, and you can read about it at the LA Times, where he's serious. He means business, and he's withholding things from the city until such time as we can address this issue of poverty and homelessness. And so, for me, I have nothing but gratitude and appreciation for the mayor, for the city council members that are saying, okay, come on, this is our opportunity. This is our watch. On our watch, we can change the narrative and we can truly be a city of angels. We can rescue our brothers and sisters. We can get them off the streets. Okay, they need streets. I'm sorry, sheets, not streets. They need blankets.
Yeah.
Okay, not boardwalks. They need that opportunity to start over. And so, like I said, I think we're in a very unique time in history. And the pandemic, the lawsuit, the high cost of affordable housing, all of it has kind of converged together where we can no longer continue with the way we've been doing things. Status quo won't work. And so now, Hope of the Valley, we're being very aggressive. Just this past year, we opened up an 85-bed shelter in North Hollywood, a 100-bed shelter in Van Nuys. We opened a navigation center in North Hollywood. We're buying Skateland. Skateland is this roller rink in Northridge, been around for 50 years. But in the pandemic, the owners haven't been able to open their doors since last March. And so I'm good friends
Yeah.
with the owners. And we talked, and they said, Ken, we would love nothing more than for the legacy of our father to be creating a place where people can truly get help and restoration. So we're in escrow right now. We should close escrow at the end of February, and that site's going to have 110 beds. And, we're going to keep doing all we can to help people.
I love that whole story, and I told my daughter that you were doing that. And when we talked about the skate land the other day, and you said that people aren't upset that homeless people are going to be there, they're upset that skate land isn't. And I told my daughter, and she was like, "Skate land's not going to be there anymore." She's 21; she hasn't gone skating there in years. But but the idea that it can bring as much
Yeah.
happiness as it always has is a beautiful thing to roll it over and into instead. You
My
know.
own daughter started crying. You
Oh.
can't buy that. But the problem is it's so hard. Here's the other thing. Right now, it's very difficult to find facilities. Okay, since pot has been legalized, buildings of that size that are 15 to 25,000 square feet, the grow industry
Just buying
has
them all
paid
up.
cash
Oh,
for
right.
those, for grow houses. And so it's but it just so happens that these owners didn't want the legacy of their father to be a grow house. They wanted it to go to help the community and to serve Los Angeles. So that's how we were able to
That's
negotiate
how you
that.
won the bidding war.
Yeah, exactly right. So I have a higher purpose. Pardon the pun.
I love the pun. If I gave you three wishes, what would they be?
Oh, I've never had anyone ask me that. Um, can I say number one, I'd have an endless supply of resources,
Yes, you can.
because that's what helps us get people off the street. I think I shared with you Alex Trebek.
Yeah.
Um, Alex Trebek called me a year ago, January, and I've never talked to Alex. I mean, he just, he had heard that we were building a shelter in North Hollywood. He calls me, says, "Ken, I'd like to come see your shelter and that you're building." I said, "Yes, sir. When?" And he said, "Tomorrow." I said, "I'll be there." And so I gave him a tour and showed him another site. And he wasn't feeling good that day. And he says, I'll be in touch. Well, 1 week went by, 2 weeks went by, 3 weeks went by. Finally, he calls me again. He goes, "Ken, I need to know how much money you make." And so I told him how much money I make, which is public knowledge anyhow. It's on our 990. And I said, "Would it be helpful if I sent our audited financials?" He goes, "Yes." I sent them to him. He calls me the next day, "Ken, I'd like you to come to my house." And who wouldn't want to go to Alex Trebek's house, right? Come on. And so I said, "Of course." And so I went there. He took me into his office, and our financials were on his desk. He had them all circled, highlighted. And he goes, "I see that you guys have social enterprise and that you earn 40% of your own money." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I see that you have contracts with the city and that all this." And he goes, "The reason why I asked you how much you make, because I supported a charity one time where the CEO was making over 400,000. He goes, "That's not where I want my money going." He goes,
And so many nonprofits pay their CEOs so much money.
"Oh, exorbitant amounts."
It's ridiculous.
I said, "Alex, would you like to come see my Hyundai out in the driveway? It has 226,000 miles. Okay, trust me." And he handed me a check for $100,000. And I was just, we needed it at that really bad. And so I gave him a hug and I said, "Alex, what would it take for me to get a picture with you?" And he said, "Well, no, you're not getting one with me looking like this. You'll need to come to Jeopardy." So he arranged, my wife and I went to Jeopardy. He called us up on stage. He
I saw
made a
that picture
big,
the other
oh
day.
yeah, he made a big deal out of us. And then, so that was great. But then in June, we're getting ready to open up that facility, which we ended up naming the community room the Alex and Jean Trebek Community Room, okay, because of his generosity. Well, he said, "Ken, would it be okay if I brought my wife? I'd like her to see the site." And so she came and I gave him a tour of the North Hollywood site. And I said, "Do you guys want to see the Van Nuys site too? It's 100 beds. It's almost, we're working on that." I took him there. And after that was all said and done, Jean, his wife, reached in her pocket and handed me a check for $500,000. We've never had that happen, ever. And I mean, I lost it. And I said, "Alex," because he was terminal, with his
Yeah.
cancer. And I said, "Would you be okay if we used that gift as a lead gift for our next big shelter, which was Skateland?" Okay. And so he said, "I would be honored." And then, of course, he passed away. Uh, but I'll tell you this, I haven't really gone public with it yet, but I've been talking with the executive producers of Jeopardy and with Gene Trebek and others, and we're actually going to name the new shelter the Trebek Center
That's
in
Skateland.
honor in Skateland. Yeah, it's
Oh,
going to be the Trebek Center in honor of Alex. But because of resources, we can do great things. My first wish is to have
more
unlimited
resources.
resources.
Okay.
My second wish would be healing of all the pain. There's so much pain that people carry with them, and they just never get over it. I shared with you my own pain. I was a pastor for many years. Okay, I started church, grew to several couple thousand people, weekend services, and I had my own crash and burn. I lost everything. I went through a divorce. I contemplated suicide. It was just the darkest days of my life until somebody uh, asked me if I'd ever considered working with the poor and the homeless, and I said no. And he invited me to come have lunch with him at a rescue mission. He ran a mission, and there it was one of those moments where I feel like I was kind of set up by God. I can't remember ever crying so much, because everywhere I looked, I thought that could have been me, that should have been me, but for the grace of God. And I left that day and I just said, God, if you see fit to use me to give people a second chance like you've given me, then I'm open. 3 days later, they called me and asked me if I'd start something, and I said yes. Um, but it was all part of that healing process, that someone actually believed in me again, because I
Yeah.
felt so disqualified from life. I was ashamed, and I'm pretty honest. I had an affair and it just cost me everything. And it was just a very difficult time. And so the fact that I feel like my heart has healed, and I've been able to be an agent of healing for others. So that's probably the second thing. Um, and the third wish would just be that everybody else could have three wishes as well. And I
I
think we'd
like
all
that.
be okay.
I like that. And I also want to point out that mistakes people make do not define them. And it doesn't take away their significance, and it doesn't take away, it shouldn't, it's a mistake.
We're all one stupid decision away from really screwing up our lives. Okay?
Yeah.
How many people wish they hadn't had that last drink
Yeah.
before they got in their car? How many people wish they hadn't said that one word that destroyed a relationship? How many people wish they would have just gone home instead of gone someplace else? We tend to judge people for their worst mistakes, and kind of that's how we hold them. But the truth of the matter is, how many of us have done things but we just haven't been caught?
Yeah.
How many of us have done things that just hasn't been brought into the light? And
Everybody.
so exactly,
Everybody.
exactly. Yeah, so I think we need to be careful how we judge others, lest we be judged ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we are only as good as the people we surround ourselves with. And so I feel incredibly fortunate to have the most amazing people that surround me as staff, that surround me as a board of directors, that support me as donors and volunteers and stakeholders and clients and guests. And it's not that there aren't challenging days. There's plenty of them. There's
Yeah.
days where it's 3 steps forward, 4 steps backwards.
Yeah.
But it's okay. We keep moving forward, and as long as we give people opportunities, that's what people miss. That people aren't given an opportunity. And so for me, I get to employ over 200 people.
Hmm.
I get to employ over 200 people. I'm walking around today introducing myself to employees I didn't know we had, at the new shelter. And one's from Compton, one's from East LA, and
Do
I
some
just
of the homeless people end up working in your shelters?
all the time.
Oh, good.
Yes,
Oh,
and they
good.
work at our thrift stores, and they
Right.
drive our trucks, and talk about a debt of gratitude. Many of them, they came to us, they were on drugs. They go through our drug and alcohol recovery program, and they get a new lease on life. I mean, they are loyal. And don't mess with Hope of the Valley with those guys, because they saved my life,
Right,
type
sure.
type thing. And so I love nothing more than to be able to hire our own people. I think I may have shared this story with you, but this past year, I uh, I cracked a tooth, and it was just, I was in such pain, and so I called my dentist to go get it fixed. And he goes, oh, sorry, Ken, I'm not doing dentistry anymore. Call this guy. And I'm like, oh, you're kidding me. You know, the last thing I just
I like
need to
you're
get it
talking
fixed.
like your tooth isn't
Yes,
there.
like, oh, great. And so I ended up going to this new dentist. And as I walk in, you know, the receptionist, she goes, hello, can you fill out this paperwork? And she looked at me and she kind of, you know, turned her head a little bit. And she said, do you run a shelter? And I said, what? And I really didn't want to talk. It's like, I just wanted my tooth fixed. And she says, do you run a shelter? And I said, yeah. And she says, you probably don't recognize me. And I said, well, help me out. And she says, I came to your shelter 7 years ago. Myself, my husband, and my daughters. We had nothing. And you guys took us in. And you loved us. And you built into us. And she said, I just want you to know, my youngest daughter's graduating from college this year. They both graduated from college. She said, my husband has a great job, and I'm working here, and we are doing great. And I said, can I get your picture? I said, I never get to see this side of it.
7 years
People come
later.
to us, we help them, they move on. I don't see it. And it was one of those moments like, I needed that. You know, I needed to see the outcome, the fruit of our labor. And that's also, again, the power. We don't always get to see the numbers of people that we impact, you know, by our kindness, by our words, by our actions, by our forgiveness, by our love. And so, you know, we just keep doing good and keep loving people and keep helping people to the best of our ability.
I hope that your message spreads and that there is more hope, not just in the Valley, but in the city and state to state across the country and across the world. And I think that what you do it's just so selfless, and it kind of makes me feel guilty, even though I know I do good stuff, but I feel like I don't do enough. And it inspires me to want to do more. And I'm grateful for that. And to hear you say that you don't get to see the fruits of your labor, I think most people only do stuff so that they only do it to see the fruits of their labor. And so whatever it took for you to get here, Ken, you're doing a great job. And I am so grateful for what you have to offer and the time you put in and the tough days that you must go through. And this is the second time I've spoken to you, and you don't take the credit for it. I think you're an amazing human being.
Well, thank you.
I am so grateful that you shared your story with me and my viewers. And thank you so much.
Well, may the rest of our life be the best of our life. And there's nothing that we can do to change our past. Somebody once told me that just consider your anatomy. Your eyes do better going forward. Your ears hear better when it's in front. Your arms move forward. Your legs move forward. There's only one part of your anatomy that faces backwards. And unless you want to be an ass, move forward.
I guess that's the way to end this. Ladies and
Go
gentlemen,
in that direction.
Ken Kraft, be like Ken. He's wonderful. I hope he inspires you to do good things. Ken, thank you so much.
My privilege. Thank you.